For anybody who's joined as an attendee, we'll get started here in just a few minutes, so we appreciate your patience. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our engineering webinar series. We hope you, your family, your colleagues are all safe during these challenging times. My name's Keith Hayes, and I'm a customer consultant for Elsevier for our Academic East territory. And it's my privilege today to kick off another series session called A Day in the Life of an Engineer. It's my privilege today to introduce our guest speaker, Daniel Christe. He's currently an innovation technical champion in W.L. Gore's fabrics division, the makers of Gore-Tex. In this role, he leads exploration into high growth markets, business models, and technologies using an innovation or a lean innovation approach, which will be a good portion of today's chat and interview. So right now, he currently holds a bachelor's and master's degree in material science and mechanical engineering, respectively from Drexel University in Philadelphia. If we can advance to the next slide. Today's session is sponsored by Elsevier for Engineering. And the sponsors are Engineering Village, Novel, and Geofacets. Before we get started, and as people continue to join, I'm going to launch a quick poll. Go ahead and do that now. And if everyone currently in the room wouldn't mind taking just a few moments to respond. So it looks like results are coming in. We'll just keep this up for just a few more seconds. Daniel, it looks like quite a few people, this will be their first time getting exposure to lean. And as well, we have a good mix of people from different backgrounds, academic, corporate. So we'll go ahead and close that out. So Daniel, if you want to go ahead and take us away, I will go ahead and turn the presentation over to you.
Excellent. And thank you, Keith, for that introduction. Good to be with you. And good morning and good afternoon to everyone on the line. So today, it's my pleasure to spend half an hour with you discussing disruptive innovation, my background with it, and how I employ that in my day-to-day role on an innovation team within W.L. Gore and Associates. I'll start us off with a little bit of background on myself. So as you heard in the introduction, by professional pedigree, I am a material scientist and a mechanical engineer, both degrees from Drexel University, respectively. And now my current role is in W.L. Gore and Associates on a dedicated innovation team, on an innovation technical champion. I've probably said the word innovation 5 times just in the opening, so that term requires some grounding, as it is a buzzword that gets tossed around quite frequently. I want to give you my definition of innovation so that we're level set on the term. So my definition of innovation fundamentally has 2 components. It's translating an idea into a solution that adds value from a customer's perspective. And there can be many forms of value. There can be operational efficiency value. There could be network value, based on whatever the problem domain is. But innovation is not a monolithic entity. There are many different types and different stages to innovation. So the model that Gore has adopted in the last 6 or 7 years is the 3 horizons model, which originally comes from a small consulting firm called McKinsey. You may be familiar with them. In 2009, they came along proposing 3 different tiers, three different growth stages for innovation. There's the Horizon 1 innovations, which you can think of as core innovations or sustaining innovations. Those are mature technologies deployed into existing markets that your company services today. Then slightly beyond Horizon 1, you get into the Horizon 2 innovations, which are the adjacencies, with emerging technologies serving market adjacencies. And then there's the Horizon 3 innovations, which are also colloquially referred to as disruptive innovations. And that is my professional reasoning for existing. So Horizon 3 innovations in this mental model are on the periphery of the organization with the potential to have transformative impact to your organization through unlocking new business models with new technologies. So of course, not every innovation fits neatly into one of these categories, but I find this as a very useful mental model just to categorize different innovations from a portfolio management perspective. I said in my opening that innovation is a buzzword that often gets tossed around, and I want to unpack that a little bit. Innovation is more than just beanbag chairs, hackathons, and free lunches. These are symbols in our culture that have the aura of innovation surrounding them, but they are not innovation in themselves. These are really innovation activities. And I like to make a key distinction between innovation activities and innovation processes. Innovation activities are the hackathons, design thinking centers, beanbag chairs, and fancy industrial design or interior design. And in recent years, I would say in the last decade or so, they've become a lot more common in corporate settings with the realization that the world changed and that corporations were starting to get disrupted from quarters that they hadn't been before with the unlimited flow of venture capital into startups. So the way this goes is essentially in the boardroom, the CEO bangs his or her fist on the table and says, "We need innovation." And then, of course, nobody in their right mind is going to vote against innovation. So that triggers these investments into innovation activities. But the problem with innovation activities is that they often do not result in lasting impact to the organization. And very rarely does a hackathon lead to a lasting change to the top line or the bottom line. And that's because the organization didn't holistically think through innovation processes and behaviors that are required to take the seed of an idea, translate that into a solution that delivers value, in a customer's eyes. Fortunately, there is a tool stack that goes along with innovation processes, and that is often referred to as the lean startup. So there's a simple insight at the core of lean that is quite profound, and that is that startups are not merely smaller versions of large companies. They are temporary organizations that search for repeatable and scalable business models, those Horizon 3 innovations that I talked about. Contrast that with large companies. Large companies typically execute on a series of nodes, and those are the Horizon 1 organizations. Meaning you have an established sales channel, you have your familiarity with the market, and a mature technology. And that fundamentally, I think you can start to see how that creates a tension within the organization between the Horizon 1 innovations and the Horizon 3 innovations. Horizon 3 innovations, the key message here, require a different tool set, different process, different mentality than execution-focused Horizon 1 innovations. And at Gore, in the last 6 years ago or so, there was sort of a collective realization within the organization that a lot of our innovations were more Horizon 1 and 2 focused and not as much on the Horizon 3 transformative impacts. And that triggered the CTO at the time to bring in the popularizer, sometimes regarded as the founder of Lean Startup, Steve Blank, who was a serial entrepreneur who retired to become an adjunct faculty at Berkeley Haas. And we've since adopted the Lean Startup methodology in Gore and built out a formal series of processes around lean innovation in order to build up that culture and the mechanisms for Horizon 3 innovations to have lasting impacts. So I do not have time here to cover every step within lean, but I will cover the fundamental elements, the step 1 in lean innovation. Step 1 in lean innovation begins with the business model canvas. Rather than writing a business plan as we used to do in the 20th century, the 21st century approach, the lean approach, is to start off with a business model canvas. And I guarantee you, on day 1, every hypothesis that you have written on the business model canvas is wrong. Which brings me to step 2 of lean innovation, which is getting out of the building. Getting out of the building, validating a series of hypotheses on the customer segments, on value propositions, on partnerships, on the resources and channels to market, to de-risk new opportunities, and then advance them along into an innovation funnel. The way we operationalize this at Gore at a high level is through what we call an exploration funnel, even before you get into a new product development stage gate approach. So the way we operationalize this is essentially through emulating VC funding rounds with progressively increasing investment levels as exploration teams work to validate the hypotheses on the business model canvas. So on the front end, there's a lot of divergent thinking. There's validating hypotheses. There's getting out of the building to interview customers, which has been hard to do in the last 15 months. It's progressively de-risking the opportunity, validating hypotheses, and then eventually we either stop exploration and divert those resources elsewhere into other opportunities, or advance them into our new product development process so that they have a path to market. So in order to keep it succinct and on point, I'm just going to end there. That's my brief overview of lean innovation. And now I want to turn it back over to Keith for a conversation.
So one of the other things mentioned is the ability to ask questions during the session. Anybody from the audience, you'll see the Q&A box down on the Zoom controls that you can type any questions that you want to hear from as far as like Daniel's experience with lean startup methodology and just general career at Gore. Daniel, taking us back a little bit and gauging your academic experience, what was kind of your journey like at Drexel, and how did that help shape your current career and role?
Sure, I think that's an interesting question. So Drexel as an institution, one of the things that differentiates it from most institutions of higher learning in the US is the emphasis on the practical through a co-op program. It's one of only 3 or so institutions I know of that have a co-op program at scale. Every Drexel graduate graduates with 18 months of real-world work experience, where you're free to apply to any sector you want, industry. You can even do research at the university or government. And so if looking back, I didn't think of it this way at the time, but what I was really doing was essentially hypothesis testing on myself, on my interests, on my career aspirations, by sampling different environments to see what I liked and, more importantly, what I didn't like. So there is sort of that through line of, from university to my corporate role now. I've worked in academic research labs, been on the bleeding edge of new technologies. I did a stint with the federal government at Los Alamos National Lab, which was a wildly different experience. And then I ultimately converged on the type of impact I want to have, which is through products. The idea of writing, publishing academic papers, while I enjoyed being in a research environment, it didn't really sit well with me. That's not the type of impact I wanted to have. I wanted to see products on the shelf. And that's what led me to pursue a corporate path.
So unpacking that a little more, I mean, you had experience in academic, government, you found things you liked and didn't like. What drew you to Gore? And then obviously, how did you find out about Gore with how specialized it is?
Sure. Now, I first found out at Gore, interestingly enough, as an impressionable sophomore at Drexel. So I had the opportunity to do a tour at Gore's Capability Center, and I was just blown away by the breadth of products that Gore offers based on a single material set, the expanded form of ePTFE, or expanded form of Teflon. Gore is most known perhaps for fabric, for Gore-Tex fabrics, but in reality, we are a materials ingredient supplier serving automotive, aerospace, medical products, and all sorts of components, components that you would never think about on a day-to-day. And what really resonated with me was not just the breadth of products, but the culture within Gore, the emphasis on the lattice organization, the rejection of fixed hierarchies, and that really created a lasting seed. I didn't plan it this way, but with a little bit of luck and timing involved, I put Gore on the radar, and then I found my way into Gore 6 years later.
So you kind of touched on it a little bit in this management structure that Gore has at a cultural level. There's really no like this person is my boss and they tell me what to do. Can you talk a little bit about what the day-to-day is like? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people on the call that are like, man, like sometimes that might be nice.
Sure. Well, I would say my day-to-day changes based on whatever opportunity I'm pursuing. So the way that our innovation teams operate, we operate in what we call tandems. So teams of usually 2 people, a business champion and a technical champion, pursuing a new opportunity. So if I'm working an early stage opportunity on the front end of the funnel, it is very externally focused. So that is going through an intensive lean cohort, customer discovery exercise, getting out of the building quite literally, and trying to interview. And we don't just stop at 5 interviews. We go out and do hundreds of interviews across whatever market segment it is we're targeting to validate problems. That's most importantly. Most startups fail not for lack of solutions, but for lack of a customer who cares. And whereas if I'm working an opportunity later in the funnel, it becomes more convergent thinking, more execution focused at that point to translate that idea into the solution that's going to bring impact to the bottom line.
In talking about the core subject of your presentation, going back to lean, when did Gore more or less? I know you talked a little bit about it. When did Gore adopt lean, and then what does that rollout look like since the inception of lean startup?
Sure. Yeah. So I touched upon this very briefly. I'll say more about it here. So there was this realization about 2014, 2013 or so. So it predates my time at Gore. There was this realization that we had sort of lost our way with the disruptive innovations. And disruptive innovations at Gore have historically led to the creation of entire new divisions within the organization. And while impressive, the breadth and depth of the technologies, we weren't having there was this realization that we had sort of lost our way. And it wasn't that the people were doing the wrong thing. It was that the world changed fundamentally between the 2000s and the early 2010s, with a lot more capital flowing into startups and disruption coming from non-conventional corners. So while ePTFE got us to where we are the past first 60 years, that sort of created the thought of maybe we should find another material besides ePTFE and capitalize that for the next for the next 60 years. So the CTO at Gore reached out to Steve Blank and actually brought him into Gore to operationalize the lean startup within Gore. And the way that we operationalize that is through lean cohorts. So that this is an opportunity for everyone in the organization, not only the dedicated innovation teams, to take a step out of their normal commitments and spend 10 weeks at a time going after a new opportunity. And this may or may not be related to people's day-to-day commitment, but on a personal level, and I think many associates would agree with this, it is really, it's really inspiring to step out of the day-to-day, and it opens people's thought processes up to see around corners, to see new opportunities that they may not be thinking about otherwise.
So you talk in terms of like a lot of collaboration, whether it's you going out and meeting a customer at their own site, or talking in terms of just a lot of different things going on internally with the teams that you work with at Gore. How is this helping shape you as an engineer? Because I'll leave that question out there, do you?
Sure. I think it's an interesting one. I would say that the lean innovation, the customer discovery process in particular, is a very humbling experience as an engineer. And I say that because when we go to engineering school, right? When I went to engineering school, I was trained to look at the world through the lens of feasibility, meaning will it work? But I realized that there were two components missing to that to get to a successful business, which are viability, is anyone willing to purchase, and desirability. Does society want this solution? Right? And that's I would say that's the appreciation that lean has given me, is that I don't have all the answers. The answers are outside the building. For as many brilliant people that we have inside our building, there's no insights in the building. It's outside. It's in the market.
So with the situation we all kind of find ourselves in right now, with doing a lot of Zoom meetings and just kind of having to work from home, what has been your approach to ideation in this virtual setting?
Yeah, it's been a little bit difficult to get out of the building in the last 15 or 18 months or so. But that said, if you'd asked me that question at the onset of COVID, I would have said it's a disaster for lean innovation, to do customer discovery. But in reality, I've been pleasantly surprised by how effective our teams have been able to be operating in this fully virtual setting. Video, while not, I would say, still subpar compared to in-person interaction, a video call can still give you a lot of data from a prospective customer. What I'm looking for, besides the audio track, is the nonverbal cues. Looking for, when do people lean forward? When do the pupils dilate? And I can still get that on a video call.
Okay.
While video is typically the default for virtual collaboration, the virtual tools need to be used with intentionality. And it's not the only way that we do ideation at Gore. And during the pandemic, we actually launched an internal tool called the Idea Cloud. And this is an open portal for anybody in the organization to asynchronously submit either ideas, like interesting problems and compelling problems that we should go after, or technologies that maybe don't, more of a tech push approach, technologies that don't have an identified market use, and we do a mix of both market pull and technology push.
Okay. So in your day-to-day, it seems like you're practicing lean startup. You're becoming more or less an expert on it through different interactions with customers. For somebody who wants to learn more about the lean startup methodology and put it into practice in their own environment, what would be your recommendations there?
Sure. I would recommend the Eric Ries book on the lean startup. That gives good overview of the methodology.
Mhm.
There's also Steve Blank publishes a number of articles quite regularly on Harvard Business Review and comparable outlets like that. So those would be good informational resources to get started with lean if you're completely new to the topic.
Okay.
Not so much an information resource, but more of a comment around that. Lean startup and the success of lean startup is not down to any one tool, right? It's not just about the business model canvas or how you capture ideas. It is as much, if not more so, an organizational design challenge. And those are some of the hardest ones to tackle. Whenever people are involved in the system, people are protons and electrons that don't behave the same way every time.
Okay. And it looks like for those of you out in the audience as attendees, we do have quite a few minutes here left, and I do encourage if there are any questions you'd like to put in the Q&A box. It looks like we do have a few that I will share. Daniel, one of the audience members asked, you made an interesting distinction between innovation activities and innovation processes. Can you say more about this?
Sure. Yeah, that's an observation from just looking at how a number of corporations have approached innovation today. That they come to the same insight that the world has fundamentally changed around them, and that requires um, new innovation processes. Except that they don't implement the processes. What you see more often than not is innovation activities, or what I sometimes call innovation theater. So you might even have made the capital investment in an innovation center. There may be
Mhm.
hackathons regularly. There may be design thinking sessions, and all those are fine. I don't have it, to be very clear, I do not have an issue with those as themselves, but they're usually not connected to a process, that can translate ideas into a viable business. And when I say process, I'm using that term very broadly. Um, so that a venture funding model, a seed funding model, that opportunities go through a portfolio management approach to innovation
Mhm.
opportunities, and the discipline of killing zombie projects if it becomes clear that they are not going to pan out in the time frame.
Okay.
So the
No,
organizational design elements, those are often lacking. The innovation activities those are the easy things to implement. It's the processes that are much harder.
okay. And then as we wrap up here, we'll pull back up that slideshow, but I'll ask one more question. Audience member, I enjoyed your presentation. As an engineering student potentially interested in roles like yours, what advice would you give or have?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. Um, what I would say is first thing I would say is don't underestimate the power of luck and timing. Right? I didn't know that a corporate innovation role was a role that existed when I was an undergrad and graduate student. Just sort of, I happened to come upon it. But I did. But I will say also is take advantage of what's in front of you in a university. If you're in a research university, the main output of the university is not the students. It's the research, right? So take part in as many divergent activities as you can. Leverage those opportunities, form connections, and those will become enduring over your career. And you never know where those lead to. But what you will have is a set of data points informing you on what you like and, more importantly, what you don't like. And that will shape your preferences going forward once you move into the real world.
Yeah, appreciate that sharing, Daniel. I think there's a lot of value in what you just shared, and throughout this presentation, I think it's been a breath of fresh air to hear like new ideas coming out of Gore and what obviously you guys are using internally to help shape both new or help discover new products and further the innovation. If you can pull back up those final slides, we did have somebody ask if you wouldn't mind sharing this PowerPoint.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll distribute this out after the close of this session, and this will also be recorded, or we'll take the recording and put it on our YouTube channel. Daniel, if you can go, I think it's the closing slide. So previous one. So the next session in this series will be our graduate student boot camp. That's going to be led by Dr. Chris Cogswell, basically introducing new graduate students to different tools that can be used throughout their journey. That's going to take place on August 12th at 11 a.m. Central. Before we close out, I'm going to launch one final poll. Let me see if it will let me do that. If audience members wouldn't mind responding before we say goodbye. It should take just a few seconds. All right, it looks like everybody attending has responded. And Daniel, if you want to go to that last slide, I'll just show where we normally put these after they're recorded and uploaded. So we do have a engineering YouTube channel. It's called Elsevier for Engineering. All of our sessions we do record, and we will upload this session with Daniel most likely in 2 to 3 business days. But again, I really appreciate everybody joining today and spending time with us. Daniel, as our special guest, we want to thank you one last time on speaking on this interesting topic. And we hope everybody has a great rest of their week and weekend, and stay safe. Have a good one.